Welcome to another episode of World Bigfoot Radio, coming to you from the now rain-soaked mountains of western Montana. And today we've got back a guest that I had before, and a bunch of people asked questions and wondered if I would have him back again, so I'm having him back again. And we got something really interesting to talk about this time. We're going to talk about Bigfoot's peculiar eyes and underground systems. And so I'd like to welcome today's guest, Rich Soule. Welcome back, Rich.
Dude, good times. Thanks for having me again, bud.
Always welcome to be on my show, man. I just love the information and the scientific-y approach that you bring to it. Everybody can appreciate that. Do some real research, use the scientific method, and figure out what's actually going on here. So, like I said, we're going to be talking a little bit about two different things. Which one do you want to start with first?
Well, let's start with the Karst system, so we can kind of get into the habitat, and then we'll go into the eye glow, and how we can tie all that together. Because if they're living in these habitats, they need to be able to see. So
right on. Did you want to do a little shout out to your local guy over there in Nebraska? You were talking about the super adventurer, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to put him on too.
I do, yeah. Thank you. There is a gentleman that back in the early '60s, Danny Liska, and he took a BMW motorcycle from Alaska all the way down to South America, and he did the same thing like a year later in Europe. He went from Scandinavia all the way down to southern Africa. And this guy is very well known in the BMW community because he rode a BMW, and I think I have a picture of him actually that that you'll be able to post on there that has him with his BMW in a canoe in like South America.
Wait, does that count as riding it?
Technically, it looks like he's almost on it, so I would say yeah.
Okay. As long as he kept it idle.
That's right. He probably kept it idling. I don't know. But an adventurer, somebody, that was out being intimate with all of these environments all over the world, and just deserves a lot of praise. The big thing that I wanted to share about him is that he had a ranch up in Niobrara, Nebraska, and imagine this, back in the early 60s, the name of his ranch was the Bigfoot Ranch. So hi there, very cool. So this guy is a world traveler, been there, done it, you name it. He was there on a motorcycle. He traveled. I mean, there was no communication back in those days. People take for granted having cell phones. There wasn't even telephones in these areas. So this guy was out there on his own on a BMW motorcycle, and he knows about Bigfoot. He's a believer. He knows they exist. had his ranch after it, and he lived in this Verdigris Valley area, which is part of a karst system. So I thought it was a good segue to kind of get into that, but I just wanted to give a shout out to him. He passed away in the early 90s, and I do use an image that he has from one of a painting that was done, and I use that image on my SoundCloud account for all the recordings and stuff that I post. So it's like a white Bigfoot, white hair, walking through a river, and in the distance you can see a guy with a flashlight. So it's really cool. It says Knox County on it. It's in Nebraska. So, you know, he's from Nebraska, probably little known. I mean, the BMW community, I'm sure people know about him, but very few people probably know that this guy was a believer in Bigfoot, and you know, I just thought it was cool. I wanted to give a shout out to him. So.
Well, very cool. Yeah, big shout out to the Bigfoot heroes of the past. There's one that most folks don't know about, and right over there in the middle of the country in Nebraska, where you wouldn't expect it. So extremely cool there, and right in your home stomping grounds too. So he had a karst system underneath the ranch?
Yeah, that whole area, it's like a verdigris valley, and you know, we start talking about these valleys, how these karst systems will work, but typically there's a river valley, and that sort of thing. And he lived in this Knox County area where there was a large verdigris river. And in Nebraska, one thing about Nebraska that I wanted to share that most people don't realize is that when you're talking about having, for one, it has the large Ogallala aquifer, so there's a lot of water in Nebraska. But the big thing that's for Bigfooters is that Nebraska has more miles of river front than any state in the country. So most people had no idea of that, but we have literally more miles of river than anywhere else in the country. So that's a heck of a lot of areas where Bigfoot could be moving through, and Nebraska has that plentiful of that. But there's the Verdigris River that runs up by where he was up, and he lived in Niobrara, which is right in the confluence of the Missouri River and the Niobrara River. And when I first got into the first expedition I ever went on was in western Nebraska, and the river systems moved from west to east and north to south in Nebraska as they all kind of ascend towards the Missouri River and the Platte River. And what I'd found when I was out into the Pine Ridge National Forest on the first expedition I ever did, that's where the Niobrara River starts, and it's literally about far enough. You could literally jump over the river at that point. It's so small. It comes out of it comes out of the higher elevation, and Nebraska has some very unique topography. In the western part of Nebraska, they have up in this Pine Ridge area, it's very similar to the Black Hills. It's really a mirror type of kind of low mountain range like the Black Hills has. And so, you know,
right. And if you're looking at a map of the U.S., you'll notice that part of the state is sort of snuggled right in between the edge of Colorado and the edge of Wyoming. So perhaps no surprise that the landscape's going to start going upward at that point.
Yeah. Nebraska definitely has the higher elevation up in the western part, and then it all kind of goes down towards the Missouri River. So in this particular area up in Pine Ridge, they have 5,000 plus low kind of mountain range in there, very thick kind of valleys and timber, pine timbers. And then they have, coming literally out of the ground, they have springs, which are these karst type systems. And so here's this water starts just coming out of the ground and starts trickulating down, and then it flows into the Niobrara River. Like I said, it's only about as wide, you could literally jump across it. And by the time it gets to the Missouri River, when it's on the other side of Nebraska, it's very wide, a quarter mile or so. It becomes a very big river. So it's a large river system, very cool.
Wow.
Yeah. I just wanted to and there's a lot of silt sand that's moved in there. It's actually probably about 250 yards, probably wide at its widest, but it does go through a lot of pine canyons. And the other thing that's interesting too, this Niobrara River, is there's in northern Nebraska, they have glacial canyons, some remnant glacial creeks that flow into the Niobrara River. And these creeks actually were there so long ago. They were carved out. These canyons were carved out by the glacial till. And the creeks that were left behind that were still there, they were there, prior to this glacialization. They still have trout in them that you'll only find like up in Minnesota. So you have these isolated pockets. There's algae in these systems that are there that you can't find anywhere else either that is growing. So these are remnant pockets of just ancient habitat, and there's Bigfoot in all these areas. So just kind of wanted to share some interesting background on Nebraska, and then a prominent, individual who came from Nebraska who made a mark in the world in travel. And I just wanted to also kind of highlight some of the unique topography and things of the state of Nebraska. It's just people, think it's a flyover state, but there's really some beautiful, topography in Nebraska and things, national forests and that sort of thing that do have excellent Bigfoot habitat. So,
right on. And for people that are not exactly sure where Nebraska is, especially like listeners in other countries and stuff, just take a map of the continental United States, point your finger at the middle of it. That's Nebraska.
Exactly. Yep. The Missouri River borders one side, and then you get the Rocky Mountains towards the other, and there as you go to Colorado. So, and there's this large aquifer that's right in the middle. It just really has a lot of water. The waters from the mountain regions of Colorado essentially filter into that underground aquifer, and so you've got a large amount of cattle land in the prairie there. That was the largest prairie. It's kind of the Sahara, I guess, like prairie that we have there, where a lot of the buffalo and all that used to roam, and they still have buffalo and antelope, but nowhere to now. It's pretty much cattle country and a lot of that. But tons of water, though, that's the key. And when you have this, when you're a large predator and you eat meat, you're omnivorous. Especially when you're eating large amounts of meat, you have to have water to help digest that. So a state like Nebraska does have ample water for a large omnivorous predator like Bigfoot.
Yeah. I was going to say, one of the places I used to like to go check out was over on the east side of Lake Pepin in Wisconsin, and maybe like 2 miles in from where the lake is, there's one of these little karst systems, and it's fairly small. It's in this one little valley. Who knows where it connects to from there. But it's real interesting because there's a spring that comes out of the side of one of these huge bluffs, and they've tested the water from it, and apparently for whatever method that they have of testing it, they could tell it's underground for like a couple thousand years before it comes up there. And
wow.
There's a couple other little springs that feed other little rivers that are in this valley. They're all just brutally cold because it comes up from underground. And one of them's really interesting because it's, like you said, it's just barely... You might have to just like jump a little bit to jump from one side to the other, like maybe 4 feet wide or something.
Yeah.
And it comes out of the floor of the valley, and it flows for about 60 feet, and then it disappears back into the underground of the valley again. So there's this weird little stream that's like 60 feet long, and it's really strange. But that's an example of the kind of stuff that you can find in areas like this. Yeah.
When the Karst system will look at some of these landscape maps that I have, and it definitely something like that. Then it's flowing underground, and that the flow of that water is what these porous Karst systems, the sandstone that is in those, it just creates cavernous areas, and then you've got this flowing water there. So if you lived underground and you had water access year round, how awesome would that be?
Yeah.
That would be.
And I've been in a lot of big sandstone caves. They have them around Minneapolis, St. Paul, and back in the days of the bootleggers and whatnot, they made all of these caves. They would age wine in there. They would grow mushrooms in there. They would store provisions in there. And of course, the bootleggers and the criminals from Chicago would have their speakeasies hidden underground there. And the thing is that and there's an underground lake there too that flows in from the Mississippi, and would not recommend trying to go in and investigate that. You might get killed. We wisely decided to not go very far into it when it became apparent what was going to happen there. But the point here that I'm trying to make is that any of the sandstone it's really soft. It's not only easy for water to make big cave systems in it, but I mean, you can like basically tear it off the wall with your hand. Something like Bigfoot could easily tunnel it too.
Yeah, exactly. And I've got some pictures we'll get to that have it was called Robber's Cave, but it has some, it was used to store beer, and it was just one guy used a pickaxe. That the original cave itself was just essentially receding, washed out area of sandstone, and then they just made it bigger that they used for to store beer. So and this was back in the 1800s, so that was very common for early settlers to use that, as well as they were taking that from the Native Americans, because the Native Americans used those areas also. So
right.
Very long history of using these sorts of karst systems and these Dakota sandstones, because it's just easy to create a environment, and those environments are 50 to 55 degrees year round. So
right.
That is perfect. That's a perfect environment to stay in year round. It'll keep you warm in the winter and cool in the summer. So
yeah. Well, let's think about this now. We're Bigfoot, and we've got a cave system that we can live in, and we come up to the surface when we want to get food, which mostly is at night, and being that we spend a lot of time in the caves, it's probably easier to see in the dark anyway. And we can run around mostly pretty sneakily and stealthily and not have anybody see us and get our food and then go back to the cave. Well, now, what happens in the winter? Now, this brings me to the question of how much do they know or utilize food preservation? Do they know enough to, pick certain plants that they can store? You can throw a whole bag of potatoes into your cave and it'll be good all winter. If you kill a deer or something, you can leave it outside the entrance to the cave where it's 20 below. It's definitely not going to rot. There's your refrigerator. So I could see there'd be like a lot of possibilities for them to actually be able to hoard and storage food if they knew what they were doing, if they're that smart to do it during the summer months in these undergrounds, and then during the winter they could pretty much retreat there and they wouldn't have to hardly come out at all.
Yeah, and I think there's some evidence that has taken place. When I went on an expedition at the Yellow River State Forest in Iowa, it wasn't in a cave, but it was on a outcropping of a large ridge line that overlooked a river. And a couple of the investigators had found this area, and they had a bunch of scat that was laying all around this outcropping below it. And so they went up to take a look and see what it was all about. And it was just kind of a ledge. But in the wall, in the porous wall of this outcropping, were a bunch of tiny holes. And in these holes, there was acorns, there was crayfish, there was like these little storage places. So literally, if you poke a hole into this Dakota sandstone and store stuff in there, you've got little deposits of food. And I thought that was fascinating. So if they were doing that on this ledge on a ridge line, they certainly could do it underground.
Well, that would not only would it store it, it would dry it too, because if you think about sandstone, at the point where sandstone gets wet, it falls apart. Sandstone is dry. So if you cram anything with any dampness into a hole in sandstone, the sandstone's going to suck the moisture out of it.
Yeah, so that should preserve it and keep it for as long as you need it in there. And I thought that was fascinating. So yeah, I think there's good reason to believe they're doing that in these caves, and that might actually make sense that they're doing that, and they are able to stay there secluded as long as they choose to. And if the weather breaks and they can get out without making too much notice where they're at, then you see, obviously we see them out during the winter, have any sighting activity, but certainly they could lay low for as long as they want during a storm too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think when there's a cold snap, when it's like 20 below for a couple weeks or something, or when there's a big blizzard for 3 or 4 days, they can just avoid the whole damn mess and go underground, not have to even deal with it.
Yep. Yeah, no doubt. And these are conducive systems to that, especially if you have running water year round through those karst systems. You don't need to leave the cave if you got a little stream running through there. These karst systems have wet and dry caves. And so just the one that you were talking about is a prime example of you had water coming out from under the ground and then going back in. So it was running somewhere. And that's a great example of how they wouldn't even need to leave the cave if they got this running water coming right out of it. Right
exactly. Or if the cave was created by running water that's still running, at that point.
And that's typically how these are made. They're made by flood. You have a flood, they wash out some of the sandstone, and over years you just keep having these seasonal floods that come in, and then when the water recedes, it's creating a cavern. And so you might still have some of this remnant stream running through there, but the cavern just keeps getting bigger and bigger from over the years of water moves tremendous amount of silt and dirt. So you could literally, these caverns are created that way, and some of these things run for miles in areas. So they could literally be accessing these caverns for long periods of without even coming above ground. I have no doubt they can do that. There's some examples through in Native American up in the Omaha res. I was told stories of caves up in that area that literally were big enough to ride your horse through, and that large groups of people would hide with their horses in these caves. So, I mean, that's ample room for any large predator to stay in. Yep. And the thing is, a lot of these caves are closed off now, so you can't get into them. They've been known about them, they know they existed, but then, you don't even know where the entrance are of these caves anymore. So it's interesting. There's a lot of connection to, once they go underground, they just, that's off the radar and they disappear.
Yeah, and also these, just as an example here, not talking about the Karst systems, but just about other things, because there's been humans mining on this continent for a long, long time, way back before the white man ever showed up. There was people digging mines on this continent. And we've got over 2,000 known abandoned mines just in western Montana. So imagine all of the other mines that humans dug at some point for one reason or another that are abandoned and not known at this point. And like we were talking about the Karst systems a little bit earlier, the ones that we've got on the map are just the ones that we know about. There could be a tremendous amount more of this stuff that we just aren't even aware of yet, or huge cave systems we haven't found, or, look at like Mammoth Caves and some of that down in Kentucky. They haven't even finished mapping those. They've been mapping them for years, and they still haven't got it all mapped out. These things are gigantic.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I do have a map that you will have posted here on the show of the U.S. Karst map, and that's a good indicator of where cave systems can exist. But I agree, it's not the only place they do exist, because they do exist in areas that aren't on this map. So it's a good indicator of, the potential for these habitats where they're at, and that they have Karst cave systems there. But we just basically scratched the surface when it comes to finding caves. They're in areas that we simply would not even have been able to map yet. So I think that's a good point. And obviously that's where the Bigfoot, that's where they're hanging in areas that weren't going to. So
right, and ultimately what we're talking about here isn't just a geological survey. We're talking about this whole thing in relation to Bigfoot. So keeping in mind that Bigfoot is an opportunist. It doesn't necessarily have to be a natural cave in order for him to take advantage of it. I mean, we got plenty of evidence that abandoned buildings and barns and whatnot, they'll take up residence there. If there's no humans around there using it, hey, it's theirs as far as they're concerned. So it just makes sense that if there's some big, played out mine or something that we've abandoned, that they're going to take a look at it and go, hey, this is a nice house. I can take this over. There's nobody here.
And there are a lot of examples of river systems having underground caves that connect to them with water, the water flowing into that. And so what a great way for a Bigfoot that we know they're excellent swimmers. They have a hooded nose, so they can swim. We have more than enough sightings that seen them swim in rivers and lakes and oceans. And so they're out, they can swim. And what better way to access and have a secret access place than to have an underground cave system connected to like the Missouri River? Yeah. And you can get in and out of that cave system. You swim in and out of it. No human is coming in there.
No way.
That's just
I I don't know if you've heard this, but there is a story that relates to that. And I was just trying to think here while you were talking if it was Bigfoot Outlaws or where I heard it exactly, but it's somewhere down in the south, and someone had, there was a long-standing tradition that there were caves underneath one side of this river, and, you know, don't go over in that area. The area was kind of shunned. There's something dangerous that lives over there and whatnot. And, of course, the local kids, that's, you know, let's go swim there. Let's go check and see if there's a cave system over there. And lo and behold, there was an underwater access to an underground cave system that was on that side of the bank. And apparently they found there was horrible stink and evidence something had been going in and out of there. And they sort of assumed that, yeah, the monster that they were talking about does actually live in this cave, and let's get out of here sort of thing. So there's stories that actually back this up. And also at the beginning of the show, the thumbnail that I'm going to use for this show is a picture from the late 1800s that a gentleman who was doing research on trying to do photography research, basically. This is in the olden days, like if you picture an old West movie or something where they're showing the photographer on Main Street taking the pictures of the victims of the gunfighters or something. They got the tripod camera, and they have to pull up the thingy and expose the film and hold it for a little while and then close it off again, and, you know, the old-fashioned thing. Well, he was curious to see if you were in a completely lightless environment, like an underground where there was no background light, if he exposed the film for long enough, if it would actually work. And he was experimenting with different kinds of film. And he had found one that seemed to actually work. So he was trying this out, and he went way back into the Grand Caves or Grand Caverns in Kentucky, and set up the camera and was going to do a long exposure there and see if he could get a good picture of this one cave. And he was back there by himself, and he heard noise coming from deeper in the cavern system, and it sounded like something big, and it sounded like it was coming toward him. So he panicked and just kind of left his camera and with the film exposed and ran the hell out of there. And apparently he came back like 2-3 days later with a few people with weapons to retrieve his camera. And the very interesting picture resulting from that was the thumbnail picture. There's the cave. There's 3 objects that look like Bigfoot, and they have glowy eyes, and they're looking at the camera. So draw your own conclusions from that. But again, this is, you know, over 100 years ago, close to 150 years ago, that this guy did this. And there's the evidence of what it is that we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, that just totally corroborates. I love that you found that picture, and that just points out, you know, we're doing research, and we have to reach back. You have to know the past. You got to look at people have been out here doing this and finding things. We're just trying to connect it to the modern science and things like these mapped Karst systems and that sort of thing. So, you know, this research has been done. People are out there finding these things. We're pulling them out of the archives and bringing them out to the people. So that's an important fact to know. I mean, that's just awesome to know. Somebody took a picture of eye glow and picture of Bigfoot and caves 100 years ago. Amazing.
Yeah, I had actually seen this picture floating around for like 15, 20 years now, and I always wondered what the backstory was on it and where it came from. And just a few days ago, somebody had put up a little article about the picture and what it was and where it came from. And I went, oh, my God, this is exactly what me and Rich are going to be talking about. Okay, I know what picture to use for this one now. But, I mean, you know, there's a perfect example. This guy knows nothing about Bigfoot, probably never did know anything about it, was in this cave system just randomly taking pictures and got a picture of these 3 Bigfoot-looking creatures staring at his camera. So, you know, how does that just, like, randomly pop into existence if there's nothing to it?
Yeah, and if you look, what I had was the Sasquatch sightings of U.S. and Canada. There's it shows a graph of all the sightings in the whole country. And then if you look at the Karst maps, there are some really compelling connections, parallels, that these Karst systems are conducive to Bigfoot activity and Bigfoot sightings. So I think that's really cool. You'll be able to see that when you post that. And
I think the other one I'm going to put up here for the benefit of the folks, since we have these 2 really good maps where we got all the sightings and we've got the of the United States and then all of the Karst systems of the United States. I'm also going to post up the map of all the missing person clusters of the United States. So you guys can take a look at all 3 and decide what you think.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. Because in these things, they say there's when there's connection to these sorts of things, there's a story to it, and clearly there's connections to all of these things. So there's much more to all this than meets the eye. We got cave systems, we've got eye glow that we'll be talking about here in a little bit, how I believe why this makes sense and why they would be utilizing these caves. And, these Karst systems, also the next things that we have too is the actual landscapes of Karst systems, how they look. I think it's important for people to really see, you get, one of them is kind of a farm type area, would be maybe in the plains or in an area where there's a river, a riparian forest type system, and then there's another one, kind of an alpine mountain system. But they're Karst systems. They're the same thing. There's water. There's flowing water that goes underground and creates caves, and then flows out to larger river systems. And so we've got these same things in mountain regions that we're having also in lower level regions, like the Mississippi and Missouri rivers regions, and they have cave systems that are cavernous, that have the ability to sustain Bigfoot populations and all over these areas. So there's definitely something to this. I'm a firm believer in this Karst theory that this is another way to conduct research, find this Karst system in your area, look, and then build on looking for these tree and stick structure signs that we've talked about too. That's a great thing that Duke's been doing. Each show he just builds on. It's kind of a learning tool. If you follow his shows, he's building on this. He's giving you all the keys to this, to understanding what a lot of researchers have put a ton of time into, and you just have to listen and follow along, because there's been a ton of research done in the field to corroborate these sorts of things. So I've camped, I camped above cave systems, and there was a Steve Moon in Iowa is a BFRO investigator. He was a caver before he got into Bigfooting. So that connection right there. Yeah, he was into being a caver. He's an archaeologist, was a caver, and then he got into Bigfooting. So imagine that.
I don't know if you caught the earlier show that I did with Lynn Poole, where he was actually a town marshal at one point and got into a gunfight with a Bigfoot. Bigfoot didn't have a gun, but he did, unfortunately for the Bigfoot. But one of the things that he did in the area that he grew up in, which was an area where he was chased by a Janoskwa, is he did a lot of caving. He was actually involved in doing cave rescues and everything else. So he was intimately connected with the whole cave thing. And he brought that up, that there were some caves in the area he absolutely would not go into. As soon as he got near him, he got a creepy feeling and went, no, I'm just not even going in that one. And this is a fearless caver.
And I certainly, there's good reason to trust your instincts in that. I know on the Omaha res that we've identified, or at least they've told me that there's some cave systems. They know where to get into them at, but nobody's willing to go in there right now. So it is something I want to explore. I want to go. They have so much activity above ground that we haven't had to go into these caves, but we're identifying them. And at some point, we're going to figure out how to get in there. But it is. That's a different. You're going into their cave where they have every advantage. If they can see in this environment and that's their home, you have to you have to approach that very carefully. And again, look at the precedent for this. Go back in the record of what humans say about these things. If you talk to most of the native tribes, they'll tell you the same thing. The little people and Bigfoot and whatnot, they just live underground, and they come up at night, or sometimes they're around during the day, but they can live underground. And then you go back to European legends, same thing. Where the ogres and trolls live? Well, they live underground. Where the little people live? Well, they live underground. And the other thing that's actually, there's been 2 stories of people kidnapped in North America by mountain giants, and having then later gotten away from them again to tell the story. And both of them claimed these things lived in underground caverns and that they had hidden entrances. And in the one case, it was like a boulder that a human couldn't even think about moving, that it was using for a door, and as soon as it got inside, it just pulled the boulder back in again. So there's no doorway there. Yeah, there's no way we would know that. It just looked like a mountainside. And then,
Yep.
you know, if they have these entrances and like along the Missouri River where there's a cave with a river, you know, a karst system where it's a river flowing into the Missouri River through the cave system, and it's all underground, you wouldn't know. You know, you just have no access to that. You wouldn't know it. And nobody's scuba diving in the Missouri River with the way that's going. So those entrances are just not accessible to us. Another interesting picture that I sent you, and it has it's along a river. You can kind of see a picture of a boat, and then you see two figures in kind of a mound cavern kind of along this river. And this actually is a picture that Michelangelo had painted in the Vatican. And it's the Last Judgment with Jesus in the Vatican that was executed on the altar, behind the altar there in the Vatican. And this has some interesting pictures that are interesting figures that are in this mound are hairy individuals that look very similar to Bigfoot. And they're in a mound underground by a river. Imagine that.
There it is, Homo ferus in a mound underground by a river, hidden in plain sight by the Vatican. So that's why we never found out about Bigfoot.
Yeah, world's most famous artist Michelangelo paints it, and it's right in our face, and nobody
on public display in the Vatican, and nobody's paying attention. See, now this is the problem. Nobody's paying attention. It's not that it's not out there. Nobody's paying attention.
Exactly. How many people have looked at that Last Judgment painting of Michelangelo? And this is clearly a part of it. He painted this, and it is right there by a river. And these two figures are in this mound along the river. So, without question, he did an excellent job of painting Bigfoot.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is it's a split chamber. You can see the split chamber, and on the right side is like a giant or a human that's apparently not too happy, and it looks like maybe they're about to be burnt to a crisp or something. Sort of a hell-like thing there. And then on the left, you've got this kind of nice cozy cave with a Bigfoot sort of hobnob, and not even aware there's other things going on apparently. It's pretty strange.
It is. I had to include that because I totally believe they are they're having these caves by rivers, and the fact that it was in that painting, and I just couldn't ignore it. It's similar kind of karst type system, so had to include that one. This is just almost too good to be true. Folks, look at that painting yourself. Pull it up online and find that picture. It's at the very bottom of the picture. By the river, you'll be able to see it, but this is just a cutout part that we have that you'll see here on YouTube. But it's very interesting, had to include that one. So
very cool. Yeah, this is like most people, I'm sure, are not very much aware that this exists or anything because they're just not in the Vatican looking for Bigfoot evidence. So on to the next picture. We've got a spring coming up from underground here. Where's this one at?
Yeah, this one is in Iowa, and this was an area that I actually done some expeditions in, and I did some private expeditions here. It's a cave system, but you can clearly see this underground spring out. It's just coming out from right under the ground, and it's fast-flowing water, very cold and clear. And we camped literally on top of the cave system that this was coming from. And there was a sinkhole not very far from my tent, and we believed actually they were coming in and out of the sinkhole also, which is another thing you want to look for. Sinkholes, are obviously your collapsed caves, and they're inconspicuous things for them to come in and out of. They literally would just have to pull the ground up a little bit, slip in and out of there, and it's a secret entrance. And we really believed that they were coming in and out of this sinkhole that was there. It was in a real wooded area, and then you had this kind of depression, and then this cave system was on the other side of it. But we literally were camped on top of the cave, and those expeditions I've done there really helped me understand that the subterranean nature of Sasquatch and Bigfoot. That this was clear that they were living in these areas. They had year-round water, and that they could disappear at any time. You know, they could get
And
down.
how do they manage to do that? You know, the other thing that always gets me about them is, especially in climates where you've got a lot of winter and a lot of snow on the ground, yeah, they leave tracks in the snow. But really, we should be seeing a lot more tracks in the snow than we do. And the further north you go and you talk to the natives about that, the more and more they'll tell you, well, they just go underground during the winter.
Yeah, I totally believe that, and it makes sense now. And when you look at these Karst landscapes that we have posted, you'll be able to see how easy it would be for them to have access to water if they could see in these environments, which that's the whole thing about the eye glow that we'll get into, which they can. Then they have nothing holding them back from living in there. If they got water access and they can get it, they can stay there while the weather gets bad. You know, like, you know, in Nebraska and other areas, we'll have snow. It'll be snowy for a month or just a couple weeks, and then there'll be breaks in the snow where it's melted, and they could get out and run around and gather some more things, and then get back in just when they need to. You know, just stay in these systems when they have to. And so there's plenty of access for them to be in and out of there when they choose to, but they could stay down in these systems and be completely covert from anybody, and you wouldn't see any tracks or anything. You just wouldn't think they were there.
Right.
But they are.
And this leads me to bring up another point that I should mention, which I may be sidetracking us a bit on this one, but just for people to consider. A lot of the missing 411 reports, people disappear right before storms, right before blizzards, right before there's a nasty weather event, which, if you think about it, would be a great time to hunt. You go and grab something, and you don't have to worry about pursuit because the nasty weather event is going to wipe out all the traces of your trail. And if you're then going underground with it, there's no way they're ever going to find you.
Yeah, there'll be no evidence of you literally just disappeared, and there's nothing there that you'd be able to track them. They get underground. We don't do well with underground. Obviously, people hiding underground has always been a way to disappear. So, perfect example. That's an excellent example of how that could be tying into that.
It's a creepy example, and I'm not pointing the finger of blame at Bigfoot because there's other things that live underground. Remember, but it's just something to consider. If these creatures can sense incoming weather, and I mean, hey, people with arthritis can tell 2 days in advance when it's going to rain. There might, it could well be within the range of possibility that they could sense a big incoming storm system and go, hey, perfect time to go hunt. Let's go grab stuff we can't usually get away with. Let's go grab the farmer's prize pig because he won't be able to follow our tracks.
Exactly. Well, I can tell you, just when I was on the Omaha Res back in August, we had the expedition, and the final when we did a remote camp, the weather was really, the worst of the weather was to the south of us, but it was just whipping up lightning and rain, and it was just eerie environment. But it almost emboldened, it seemed like, the Bigfoot because they were coming up close. So I have no doubt that they get active, and it's almost like some sort of hunting tool that they use to get to go out and do stuff during these times. But they were really active. They were just emboldened by the weather. So there's something to that. I think you're right, Duke. I have no doubt about it. I was surprised to see that.
Yeah, that's kind of one of those things that it kind of always creeped me out, and I always went, it seems like they know when bad weather is going to hit and go hunting right before it, and then there's no traces. And this comes up a lot with Wendigos, where the legends even talk about if you go out during a blizzard, you're risking getting killed by one of these things because that's when they go out and hunt because nothing else moves around in blizzards. They just huddle in one place, so they're easy targets.
Yeah.
And, of course, during the blizzard, hunting means that when the blizzard passes, there's not going to be any tracks for anybody to follow because the blizzard's going to get rid of it.
That's right. Yeah, and they think about these things all the time, how to cover their tracks and how to stay stealth. There's a picture of the running stream that we have here, and if you can see, it's like the second or third one. There's a There is a log crossing the stream. Can you see that with another log holding it up?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. That doesn't look normal. It looks like it was put there. And it looks like it was the log holding it up. It's literally stuck in between. That log is like split, and it's kind of stuck in between it. I think a young one was using that just to access the water and to take a drink, and then they could step off there. I just thought that was fascinating. It did not look like that would fall in that way. And
kind of a sneaky way to take a drink without leaving a track. You can grab on with one hand and just lean down, touch your lips to the water, suck it up, and not have to ever put your foot near it.
Yeah, and that is common, especially when you have real muddy streams, and you've got a lot of mud around them. That's definitely something that an old researcher in Iowa told me, Jerry Ulrich. He said that they will push a tree down into the river, and then they just access on the tree. They access the river to get a drink, and so they're not leaving any footprints on that muddy river. They think about these things. This is what they're doing. They have all the techniques to hide in the wild, and we think we know everything, and they hide it right in our face. They push a tree down the river, and they enter that way, and we're like, oh, I fish here all the time. I never see any footprints. Oh, really? That tree that got pushed over?
It suspiciously fell over when none of the other trees around it did, and there was no storm. Yeah. You know, just to give the other side of the coin to this, conversely, they're so aware of what the human presence in their environment is like that if they're in areas where there aren't any humans around, they'll make dumb mistakes. And prime example of that is a guest that I got coming up here, whose brother actually researches this one area occasionally. He knows they're around there, but nobody ever goes to this place. It's way out in the middle of nowhere, and he rarely goes there. So they're pretty lackadaisical about it, and they've got pictures of not only adult but squatchlet tracks all over the place in this mud next to this little riverbank, which in an area where there was humans, no way in hell would they let that happen. But since there's no humans around, they really don't care that much.
Yeah, exactly. Or if they're in an area like on the Omaha Res where they come into town all the time. They're literally coming into town and they're looking through garbage cans. If people discard a deer in the yard, they're going to go eat that. They'll leave a print every now and then because they just don't care. They know that you know, and that they're there.
So why bother being that careful anymore? They're not going to stop us. And, they know we're here, so who cares? It's kind of weird the way they react like that. And apparently in this area, as you'd expect in areas where they interact in human suburbs and stuff like that, they're not quite so freaked out by humans. Now this area, they had squatchlets and they were in the middle of nowhere. And, man, when he got up there, they had aggressive behavior every time and wanted to get him out of there. And then when his sister, who I also know went up there, and here's the beauty of this encounter, they're both going to be on the show, she had the same thing happen. She actually got hit by a good-sized chunk of wood that they threw at her and had several vocalizations, get out of the area. And she snapped a couple interesting pictures, one back over her shoulder that shows a mama and a squatchlet sitting back in the tree line about 30 feet away looking at her. So they were right up on her, and they were not happy that she was there, and they made it very clear that you need to leave right now.
Yeah, and they will do that. And that's interesting, they throw, I've had stuff thrown at me quite a bit. Even recently they were throwing rocks at my tent while I was snoring. But
as mentioned in last episode, that was funny.
And Barry even mentioned to me when I talked to him, he goes, after even we got back in the tent after we got up and we had shined flashlights around at 5 a.m. because we had these wood knocks were just unbelievable. They just blasted us out of the tent. We got up and looked around, but we were so tired. It was like 5:30. We decided we'd just try to go back to bed. And so when we laid back down, as soon as I rolled over, Barry said that the side of tent that I was laying on moved back out, like something had been looking in at us.
Oh God!
I have little tents that just the top of it is mesh, and then you have your wind, fly over top of it, so it's all mesh, and then you just have that wind fly over it. Well, it must have been pushing the mesh part down and pulling up the wind fly to be looking at it.
So it could peek in, yeah.
So it peek, and then when I rolled over, it quickly went back, because Barry said, I watched that whole thing just recede back, and I was like, Oh, well, you could have told me something at that time. But,
yeah, you might have mentioned that while I was laying 1 foot away from it.
Literally inches from a Bigfoot. But at any rate, we both had gotten grabbed that night. They were grabbing our feet. They pushed in one side of my tent where there was a little mesh thing that it's just, it was a 4-man tent, but if you know how tents are, 2 people can fit in a 4-man tent, and that's about it. Well, it was Barry and I, and the one side of it had this mesh kind of a little zipper bag that you could you put stuff in, and that zipper bag, it was pushed down so far it rubbed on my leg, and then they grabbed my foot. So that was interesting. They were in very close, and I do believe when the alpha male came there, and those wood knocks that we had that were just unbelievably loud, I believe that he was directing that not only at us, but he was directing it at the juveniles that were there. Like, you guys need to get in line. Do not mess with these people. You're not supposed to do that. And
leave the humans alone.
Enough. This is enough. You know, it's like parents coming home and the kids are screwing around. That's it. And I totally believe that's what part of that was.
Wow.
But that was.
It sounds like the ones you had up by the camp there were not at all shy about messing with you guys and trying to get you to leave the area, though. They were being pretty insistent.
They certainly were. They were all over. And when I was in my tent by myself for a while before Barry, he had to take a group back down. He didn't want to stay up there, which is understandable. But so I was in there for about an hour by myself, and things got pretty. The feeling there was not welcoming, and my recorder was moving back and forth. I had a recorder running, and my whole side of my tent was pushed in. Well, you know, if you know anything how Bigfoot typically work, they usually distract one way and then try something else behind you or something. So I can only imagine when I'm looking at one side of the tent what's going on the other side of the tent.
Yeah, exactly.
They were definitely all over, and they were up in the trees doing wood knocks, which was very interesting. Being up, knowing that they're up in these trees above us and knocking. That was heard by Tammy, one of the ladies that was camped. My hearing's not the best, but the ladies that were there could hear everything. They said they were walking all around our tents, and they were being actually pretty aggressive. They thought up until the big alpha male came back, or when he came up there, they kind of just had a distance from us and then threw rocks at us while we were snoring.
Disturbing the peace with your snoring.
Yeah. To get back to some of these pictures, I have pictures of me in Iowa in that cave system, and you can see it behind. You can see the stream as it's coming out of the water, and then there's some pictures of Barry and Elvie and I, and Barry and. So
is Elvin's the gigantic one that's like almost Sasquatch size? Yeah,
Elvie's down on the ground there. Yeah.
Okay.
And then he's with red squatching there, and that's me in the one picture, and then in the black, and then my friend Paul in the other one, and we all do res squatching too. We go on the res, but that's the cave system behind it. You can kind of see in the one picture that I'm in the black there. You can see how the water had ran down kind of from the top of this cave, and you can see the cave entrance there.
Yeah.
But the stream is just right behind us where it was coming out of the ground there. So just kind of give people examples of how these Karst systems work and how the caves become these entrances to these very recluse areas. And that was a good example of it. This was a park that was built literally on top of the cave with a spring. And
cool.
Springs, if there's a spring in your area that has clear running water like that, there's a good chance that's look for Bigfoot activity, because they'll probably be around that spring wanting that access, without a doubt. Look for their structures. They also like the confluences of rivers, like where two rivers will come together. That's a good spot too, that you might see some signs of Bigfoot, some structures in that. And another picture that we have, it's me standing in an island area. It's literally surrounded by water, and there was a teepee, kind of an older teepee structure, and that's in Nebraska, in my research area. And that was in the spring.
Yeah, I think we had a winter picture of this one in the tree structure show, didn't we?
Yeah. So this is in the spring, and clearly look how everything's grown up all around it. And you can just see that, these areas are very lush. They have a lot of wildlife in these areas. And I actually found these little islands. It's Salt Creek, but there's little islands that are created in these systems because when you just allow these rivers to go to flow on their own, they create kind of oxbows and islands and that sort of thing. And there is a ton of islands in this 1,700 acres. And you literally can only get in one way. So it's easy for them to watch who's coming into these areas. And then they could just exit out the other area and get out of the water. And I've had that happen before. I was in there looking around, and all of a sudden I hear something huge jump off the side of the riverbank down. It's about 20 feet. And it's this huge thud, and you can see this branch just swinging like a diving board. Like something grabbed it, jumped off. I recorded it. It was really cool. But it just reminded me, they can just disappear easily. They're so much faster than us. And so, and me, you could tell in this picture I'm walking, it's about waist high. I'm not getting through there very fast. I'm not moving very quickly through these environments. But we found a couple spots along this river. The river was up very high because of some flooding. But there were several spots that were just worn down, and it was either deer laying there or it was some Bigfoot hanging out watching us from the other side of the creek, and then we came over that way. I thought it was very interesting because it was just along the river, and, they could have easily been sitting in there. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah,
one of the things I'll kind of talk about, too, when we get to the eye glow, I wanted to make a brief comment about a recent wood booger who was the M.K. Davis, I think, did a little commentary on that was drowning a deer. I think that was recently, people had seen that, the wood booger drowning a deer. I don't know if you saw that video.
Yeah, I saw it.
But there is a little bit of an eye glow to that picture that I thought was really cool. And you can see it. When you slow that down, you can see the eyes shining and casting illuminating light out of their eyes. So I thought that was pretty cool. But that doesn't surprise me. They would grab one in a river like that and just pull them down. It would take the least amount of energy just to stand on them while you're looking around to see if anybody else is coming, and just to stand on their neck while they struggle and die and drown.
Yeah. It was pretty brutal.
I thought it was classic Sasquatch behavior. Some people are like, oh, well, they're not psychotic, or they would, why would they act so psychotic? Come on, people. They're going to do the least amount of energy it's going to take. And standing on the deer's neck and looking around for anybody else coming is the least amount of energy it's going to take to kill this deer. They're not going to have to mess with the horns or anything like that, And
again, I had a guest on early in my show, Donnie, who saw a dogman killing a deer that way, and he was actually standing on its neck in the river drowning it, and turned and saw them come walking up, and wasn't really very into the idea of giving up his kill and leaving. So you can imagine that was a hair-raising one. But yeah, he was standing in the river on the deer, drowning it.
I think that's exactly what that wood booger video. You can't really see it that well. You can just see something, kind of splashing around in the water that looks to be a deer. But I think that's exactly what it was doing. It was just standing on its neck, and that way it can look around while, see if anybody's coming. They are always vigilant, and that would take the least amount of energy. So that was something I thought was interesting. But, now we can kind of get into we looked at some of the habitat here, like the caves and that, but now we got some interior of a cave. If you got to that picture, at the one, there's some lights, and this is this is a sandstone cave. And if you look at this, there are pickaxe. You can see the pickaxe marks on the top of it, where a single guy had open this cave up after it was created just through water. But this is a prime example of sandstone cave, and this one's in Lincoln Robbers Cave. Right, but it's right near my research area, Wilderness Park. That's why I totally believe the Bigfoot are using other cave systems in this park. I think this totally corroborates it, because these are cavernous. If you see people standing there in that one picture, and then you can also see how they're sandy on the bottom of them, of the cave, and you can see where some water had been in the past. But this was man-made, so it's certainly more open that way.
And more regular. You've got the regular wall height and size and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, and they just expanded on what was already there, essentially. But a Bigfoot could easily make big burrows like this, without question. This is about 30 to 60 feet underground, so there are they do go quite a ways underground. But it would not be a challenge for a Bigfoot to create an access to an area that would be deeper underground and that would be completely have several entrances to those locations. So just so you get an idea of what one of these, if nobody's ever been in a sandstone cave, this is what they look like. They have very sandy ground. It's not like it's rocky or anything like that. It's just very sandy. You can walk around in there barefoot, no problem at all. The temperature would stay about 50, 55 degrees year round. And you can see there's graffiti and some carvings and stuff in this over the years. Very easy, like I talked about before. You could carve out little niches to put crayfish or acorns or whatever it is you want to save, and it's almost like drying your, maybe they put beef meat in there, deer meat or something, and it dries it out and keeps it over the winter for them. I mean, we just don't know. But it's certainly possible for them to keep a variety of things so that they could stay underground for a period of time. So I thought those were real good pictures. Those are great examples. You can tour that, and it's called Robbers Cave. There's a lot of history. Native Americans were using that. There's the history of it, that it's most of it's closed off now, but there's supposedly miles of these caves in this area. And nobody knows about them. Absolutely nobody knows about them anymore. So
and that's the thing. Think about how many cave systems there are like that, whether natural or created by somebody else, that have been forgotten about and abandoned. And, of course, you know who's found out about them is still using them.
Exactly. And that's why that Karst system map is so important, because you can look there and say, with that Karst system map, the environment is right for that. Even though you don't think there's anything there, it could be. They could easily make these burrows in those areas without a doubt. Just because you don't know that there's a cave there doesn't mean they're not making them. So just want to take them from it. So because I know a lot of people are like, well, there's no caves around here. Never heard of a cave around here. Well, look on that map, and just because it's not even on the map, if there's Dakota sandstone or something in that area, that's the type of environment we're talking about. If you have springs, we got a spring on our property, but we don't have any caves. Well, there's a good chance there's a cave there somewhere also.
You just haven't found the entrance. It's underground. That's why you haven't seen it.
Exactly. So I just want to kind of open people's eyes to this, because this is underground, and just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And that's the kind of problem that we face with this, is that people say, well, I've never seen them, or I've never, I don't think there's enough here for them to live in this area. Well, if they have an underground spring, and their spring is running, and if you're in a farm area, there's plenty of calories for these large omnivores. There's absolutely plenty of calories. So they're there, they're living there, they're making their own burrows if there's not cave systems, and they are moving around at night or in times that you're not aware that they're there. So just kind of wanting to open people's mind up to that. And then I think we kind of talked about the Karst system, if that's good enough.
We need to move on to the how are they navigating around in these Karst systems part of this. We're actually kind of running low on time, so so you got the rock art of Bigfoot here next. And I always kind of like that picture, and it's like, well, that's big and scary and Bigfooty looking. And what's with the things? Is he got like blood dripping down from his eyes, or are they trying to indicate that like he's got shine coming off his eyes, or what are they doing to that drawing? What do you think?
Well, that's kind of what that's kind of what drew my attention to it. You know, you really don't understand what they were trying. Their interpretations generally are from things they actually see. So how do you draw a picture of eye glow or somebody, some luminescent eyesight? You know, how do you portray that? And I think if you put that into context of these eyeballs, then that makes sense. These are almost like beams of light.
Yeah. That's kind of what it looked like to me. And then there's like little, it radiates like a little bit lighter and less as it goes, just like a flashlight beam or something. And it looked to me like that's what they're, you know, I always kind of wondered about that. Like, are they trying to show eye glow or something here? What is with the eyes on this thing? Because it's pretty obvious what it is other than that, but it's like, well, what's with the eyes, you know?
Yeah, and I think, you know, this was an excellent attempt at trying to, you know, when you do, Native Americans are very, as far as the visual aspect of this, try to really capture what was happening as accurately as they could. Well, that would be very difficult to explain how somebody's eyes glow and how you would paint such a thing. But I think that was a really good interpretation of it, and I think that's what they were trying to represent in that picture. And so,
also, interestingly and tellingly, it's red.
Yes, which is another color that we see very common of their eye glow. Not necessarily a good sign to have the red eye glow.
But it is something that's regularly reported. So again, that fits right in with Bigfoot and eye glow and red eye glow, and maybe that's what they were trying to depict there. So just a little interesting note on that. So in the next picture, looks like somebody else is doing a drawing of eye glow here.
Yeah, that one was from, actually I included that because I thought it was cool, plus it was from a Radiohead album called King of Limbs from like 2012. But they had this, like, all these pictures of like forests and stuff, and I just thought this looked like some kind of eye glow almost. Light, illuminating light. So I included it just because I thought it was a cool picture with trees behind it with some illuminated eyes, but also it was a really cool album, so I liked Radiohead, but I thought that was really cool.
Okay, so plug for Radiohead. They don't suck, I agree.
Yeah, so that was kind of cool, and they got some pretty cool songs that are kind of squatchy, so check that out. But I just thought cool art. You know, a lot of times we have art imitating, you know, what's going on in the real world, and sometimes this is what is somebody's taking, trying to do some abstract art or something from really things that they've experienced, and this is the best way they can explain it. So we have cavemen doing it, and we have modern artists doing it. Why not?
There you go.
You know, ancient Native Americans and modern artists. So just thought I'd give a couple, you know, pictures like that to just kind of show artwork of it. And then the next one is kind of an interesting one that I had gotten off of an article that they were talking about having genetic research done and finding that there was sub-Saharan Africans having ghost genes, and this picture was with all that. And I thought, you know, wow, that's crazy, because this almost looks like some kind of eye glow generated.
Yeah, the way they got the art set up, it looks like the pupil in the eye is glowing red.
Yeah, and what's going on with that? That's really cool. And this is just an artist's representation of some ancient man, or ancient hominid, but really cool artwork that's selling some sort of electric, some sort of eye glow or something like that. And also, I thought it was cool during that storm that when I was up there with all this lightning around, they were really active. So there's something with this electricity thing going on. Very cool. And then
the next two pictures are the ones that I'm excited to get to, because these are real pictures of real eye glow.
These are actual pictures of eye glow. These were taken on the Omaha Res by Barry and Derek Webster of Res Squatching. And I blew the one picture up and put my website on that just so when I first put it out there, because I had changed also the color in the other picture, but the first picture you look at, what's happening there is very interesting, and it's really going to depend on the quality of your screen that you have if you're watching this on YouTube. But if you're just listening to us, we'll try to walk you through this. There is one eye that is definitely illuminated, and underneath it, to the right of it, you can almost see that it's oily skin, that almost like this. There's a reflection on the skin also. It's interesting. And then the other eye that would be on the left side is partially closed. And what I showed this picture to Dr. Meldrum when he was on the Omaha Res back in January, and he made an interesting comment because at the time, typically we do not shine lights on them. But in this picture, they did shine a big floodlight. It was while the eye was glowing, they shined a floodlight on it. And what we believe it was doing is when you have a bright light looking at you, adjust your eye. Sometimes if you hold one eye closed, you can adjust your vision to the light source. So I thought that was a really interesting comment. But this is the eyes were glowing. This isn't a reflection of that light. This is actual eye glow. And there's a big difference between that. If you put a light on a raccoon or something like that, you will have them reflect light, or a deer. But these eyes glow in complete darkness. There's nothing around them. And I have seen leaves of trees, like a Bigfoot standing under the tree, and all of a sudden they're looking around. You can see them look one way or the other, and the leaves of the trees around it are illuminated as it's turning its head and looking. So it is casting this light out. And that's telling, because if they live underground, if they're in an area where they're in these karst systems and living underground, how are they going to see under there? We can't see underground.
There's no light. You've got to have light in order to see.
There's absolutely no light. And if they're entering these in caves that's just water excess, there's not even any ambient light at anything, nothing. So very interesting. I found something on the Omaha Res that was cool too when I was just there in August. There was this fungi that was glowing in the dark. It was some kind of fungi that was on the ground. I couldn't believe it. It just glowed. And I bet they'll grab some of this fungi and take that down there in the caves with them too. Just,
yeah, sure. They're like little flashlights.
They're just kind of cool. You just kind of hang them up or whatever. I don't know, but it just caught my attention. I thought, there are other things in nature that are bioluminescent that have light sources that way. And what I've recently just found out, the first picture is just the actual color, so it's kind of a white amber color, and you can see the eye that clearly there is a light source coming out of that eye. And then the second picture is blue. I altered it in the blue temperature color to show temperature variation, and that's how you could change colors. Is the temperature variation changes the color of something from one color to another in the light spectrum. And I thought that was interesting, so I just changed it. But blue is a common one that we see with young Bigfoot. A lot of the very young ones that have been seen, you'll see their eyes are blue. They'll glow in blue. We've seen, I believe they have 2 or more offspring, so many times sightings have been seen, several little blue eyes looking at you from from behind tree or behind in a ditch area or somewhere where they're being kept. So that's very common. And then the red eye glow, we typically have seen that too. That's generally, we understand that might not be the best inviting situation to be in. Typically they could be not happy. I believe they are communicating at some extent too with this eye glow, but they have the ability to completely use this to see in caves and get around in areas, get in mountains, wherever they need to be at night with no light at all, and they can traverse through the forests or mountains with no problem. No problem.
I got a question about your two pictures of the eye glow here. Is he looking at the camera or is he profile to it?
He's looking directly at it. So
okay.
If you can see, the left eye is almost closed. There's just barely any light, if you can see that.
Right. It looks like there's a little blip of light off to the side of where the right eye is.
And I think that's actually some reflection either from when they put because their skins are oily. If you've ever had one touch a window or touch something, there's like oil that they leave. They have like oily skin. Well, if you look at the side of his face next to that eye, that might just be some reflection of oil either from his own eye glow or from the light that they had shined on him at that time. So I think you're seeing a little bit of his cheek area or partially just outside the eyeball area. But you also see their eyes they're big. Their eyes are very big. They're huge. They're much bigger. If you ever stood next to our family used to have draft horses, and a draft horse is, over 1,500 pounds or so, and their eyes are just huge, and they stand about 8 feet tall, and their head stood straight up, 7 to 8 feet tall, and they got huge eyes. So imagine something with just big, very big, huge eyes that is 10 feet tall.
That's one thing that always gets me is a lot of the people that do illustrations of Bigfoot, they always try and make them with these beady little eyes, and it's like, I don't know what you're drawing, dude, but that ain't it. The first one that I saw was a Type 4. It was during the day, and it was nice and bright, but you could still the pits of his eyes. His eyeballs had to be like the size of a soda can. They were huge.
Exactly, their eyes are huge, and they're so that's another tell sign of them that they have these huge eyes. They can and I totally I've seen this eye glow many times. I mean. Probably 100 or more times I have seen it now in the bush. I've been out that much with that many Bigfoot that I've seen eye glow, and I am totally convinced this is something they do, and I totally believe that it makes sense for them to have that in the Karst system. If they're an ancient being, which I believe they are, they found footprints next to dinosaur. They found hominid footprints next to dinosaurs in places. California and stuff. So if that's a relative of Bigfoot, then they're very old, and they may have these ancient vestiges of eye glow and things that are truly a part of the natural world we live in. This isn't anything supernatural, people. This is not a supernatural power. This is
as far as that goes, you can look at lots of examples of deep sea life where the critters have, for one reason or another, developed this ability to make themselves glow or flash colors and patterns. I mean, cuttlefish are even weirder. They can change their texture of their skin and form different colors and patterns on it, simultaneously. It's really weird. But even here on the surface, in the normal, plain old, average, boring world that we live in, there's these things that down south they call lightning bugs, and up here we call fireflies, and they can light up. So they don't have any supernatural power to light up. They're fireflies.
And that's a chemical reaction of luciferin and luciferase chemicals interacting, and that's actually a cold light source. They call that a cold light source. It does not give off infrared or any ultraviolet heat sensing. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to be able to see them with those type of heat sensing thermal detectors. They're giving off something that isn't you're not able to see, which is very interesting.
No heat signature.
It's a cold light, and so a lot of times you'll get people, I see this, and I can't get any view of anything on my thermal or anything. Well, that they're using probably a cold light chemical reaction too that is not necessarily giving off heat. It's giving
you would think it would have to be. I mean, if your eyeballs heated up every time you wanted to make them glow so you could see underground, that wouldn't work very well. You'd have all kinds of problems associated with that.
Yeah. So just so people understand that this is all scientific. This isn't anything that, we're not just, digging for things here and trying to make this all work. It works because it does work, because they live underground, because they do. Many people have seen this eye glow. These pictures that I have here are evidence of their eye glow. There's a 20-minute video to these pictures. These are just single pictures. There's a 20-minute video that is on YouTube that you can see of this video that I have linked on my website. 20 minutes of these eyes glowing. So it's not just a still picture, and a lot of people, still pictures don't get a lot of attention because it's hard, but the video is pretty compelling. without
Yeah, I would say, and encouraging everybody to go check this out. Is it on YouTube then? Where do they go to find it? Is it on Knox Keegas?
Well, if you go to my website, Bigfoot Bioelectric Static Theory, on my website, look on that page, and there will be a link to this video of these two pictures of eye glow that I have on there. And
Very
so
cool.
It's probably just easier to go to my website and then go to it from there. So,
right
and then we've got some other pictures here. We got Sibylla Irwin. Courtesy of her, had some pictures that we have posted here of pictures that she had drawn of Bigfoot with eye glow. And so that's again, she does renderings for people who had firsthand sightings and just draws from what they had seen.
Yep.
So
and this is commonly reported. You'll see a lot of artists doing, art of Bigfoot where they've got glowing eyes, and this is, where it comes from. It's not like, well, let's make the eyes look glowy so it's scarier, and that's not it. No, it's because the people are reporting that that's what they're seeing. So the artists are trying to do artistic representations of what they're being reported as people having seen. The other thing that's interesting to bring up here, and I had a conversation with one of my friends who's been guest on the show a couple times and probably will be back again in the future here, about his experiences. And he has, what he says lines up with what I've heard from a couple other people that have been in the situation where they've actually had a flashlight on one of them. They've had more than one flashlight on them. And there were more than one person they're observing, obviously, and they were seeing different colored reflections depending on which angle they were to which flashlight beam that was on it.
Oh, wow.
And one of them actually, two of them had flashlight beams on it. In one situation, there was a third person, because the one said, it's green, no, it's blue. It's green, no, it's blue. And the person walked from one side of the back of the one person, past them, over to the other person, and past them, and went, yeah, it's both, and it's white too. It depends on where you're standing.
Yeah, and I do believe they have control over that, the colors that they probably can see. If you're seeing the primary colors, you can probably have variations of all the color spectrum. So without a doubt, I think they have control over what color they're utilizing and what they're emitting, and whether that's used for communication purposes or just better seen in certain environments, I'm not sure.
One thing that I've noticed is that if you have different colored lights, like if you have these lights that have basically like a blue light on it, you'll get a different color reflection than you will off of pure white light, or you will off of a yellow light. And then it also seems to depend on what angle they're at. Like if it's just a background light and you're getting like a green glow it seems to be looking at you and you're getting a green glow on it, it's not looking at you, it's looking at the light.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I mean, this is just fascinating, and this is a big reason why when I do research at night, we typically don't have any lights on or anything, because when we do like a whoop, a really low whoop or something, or a wood knock to let them know, very typically we'll talk in Omaha language and introduce everybody. We try to do it very respectfully, like, we're here. This is our names. We each introduce ourselves, but we can look out then in these woods and start seeing these eyes glow, start to peek around trees, and you can see them start moving towards us with these illuminated eyes, and it is just crazy. I mean, every time I see it, it's such an awesome experience because. I
bet it never stops being creepy either. Every time it's like, oh God, here we go again.
It is. I mean, because this is what you came for, and some people, they're not prepared. They're not prepared for that. They didn't realize they're going to come right up to us like that. And then you talk about, well, we're going to pitch a tent out here now and spend the night here, and they're right out here, and so it's a bit overwhelming for people if you don't know what you're getting into in that. And I certainly, I encourage people to do this, but to be safe and go out with people who know what they're doing. But certainly don't do this on your own. You should have a buddy system, and also be in those areas during the day so you know what you're getting into in the dark. Don't just go out, because there's these ridges and cliffs and stuff. You know, people could easily fall off and get hurt. We don't want to do that. They're in environments that are tough enough to get into already. So use some common sense when you're doing this.
Safety first. Scout the area by day before you go wandering around in it at night.
Exactly. And but if you're seeing these structures and that sort of thing during the day, and you want to come back out there at night, take note of that, and then know where you need to be on your trail or whatever, where a safe place for you would be at, and then you could try to engage them that way with at least having somebody else with you. You know, those are things you can try to do. But if you're out there in complete darkness and looking, you'll see these eyes, these glowing eyes peeking out from around trees or coming towards you if they're in that area. And there's usually always a sentinel. You know, anytime I've gone into any area, any park or anything like that, there's generally somebody right near the beginning of the trailhead. You don't have to go hike back a mile in there. They're already watching you. So it isn't like you've got to be, you know, Mr. Adventurer that I got to get out into the deepest, darkest part of the woods. That's not necessarily the case.
Nope. No, in fact, you want to stay away from the deepest, darkest part of the woods, because that's where the type 3s and 4s live. Don't go there.
Exactly.
Go to the areas near civilization where those nice opportunistic type 1s and 2s are hanging around that aren't so dangerous. But in any case, if you're going to do this and you haven't had a lot of experience already and you find where there's some stick structures and you decide, scout it during the day and I'm going to go up there at night and check the whole thing out, safety first, man. Make sure that you've got an escape route. Make sure that you've got a plan. Don't just, get yourself into a situation where you're camped up there and all of a sudden they're not digging it and they're getting aggressive and hostile and you're there without a flashlight in the dark not knowing which way to go. You better have an escape route plan just in case that you have to pack up and get out of there, or worst case scenario, just get up and get out of there and come back and get stuff the next day or whatever. Always be aware of that. Don't get yourself into a position where you're basically trapped and you have no options.
Exactly, because they're just like any other, animal, and I'm not saying they're animals, but just, they sense that you're vulnerable and aren't going to stand up for yourself. That triggers things with some animals, and you don't want to make yourself a victim.
Exactly. Same thing as running. Don't run. Never, ever, ever run, because it might trigger their predator instinct to chase you. Yes. And, so do not frickin' run. No matter how scared you are, be respectful, back off slowly, don't look dangerous.
And you're not going to outrun them, so don't even try.
No. All you're going to do is get them to think that it's fun and they're going to chase you, and might forget for a minute or two that they're not actually trying to hurt you.
But you put a light on them. Like I said, I was talking about not having a flashlight out while you're looking, but keep a flashlight with you, without a doubt, a very good flashlight, because if you get stuff thrown at you and you're in a situation that you do feel dangerous, we had that. We had tree knocks around us that became very disturbing, and what we ended up doing is getting up and putting a light source all around us. Yep. And that was very clear that we ain't putting up with this. And we all got some
other researchers down in Texas that have tried blue lasers, and they swear by them.
I have heard that too. I've heard some things about the lasers, using the blue lasers. Definitely, I've heard.
They really seem to hate that color. If you want to make them go away, blue lasers seem to work good.
Yeah, so that, as a last resort, something like that is probably something definitely to have. Use caution. I'm trying to just open your mind to this type of concept of eye glow, and certainly encourage people to experience it themselves, but do it with people who have experience, and do it with a sense of that you need to be out in the bush with some protection, and at least know that you are responsible for your own safety. Don't think that they're going to just treat you like you're one of, no threat, because they may be unhappy you're there in their environment.
Yeah. And even if you're non-threatening, they can still be unhappy that you're where you're at. It doesn't matter if you present an actual threat. They can just be unhappy that you're there. That's all it takes sometimes. So be aware of that, and again, here's a good reason to not be going out into the middle of nowhere to do this. Not only are you more likely to run into type 3s and 4s out there, But you're also more likely to run into Bigfoot troops that have very little contact with humans and have a very short temper because of it. They're not used to having to put up with you. They don't want to put up with you, and they're not going to put up with you. So, you know, in those situations, a type 1 or a type 2 could be just as dangerous as the other ones, especially if they've got young around, and they're just not willing to put up with you being there at all. So be very careful with what you're doing in this situation. I really don't encourage, you know, beginners to go out and do this sort of thing generally. So if you do decide you want to go do this, try and find somebody around your area that already does research, is reputable, knows what they're talking about, and go out with them. But be very careful.
Yeah, and the last picture that I had here of eye glow was of a red eye glow, which is pertinent to what we're just talking about. Typically that is associated with probably not being happy with what you're doing or being in that area, and you might consider that a warning sign. That particular picture we have here, I don't know who the artist was of that, but I thought that was a really interesting picture. The other thing that I thought was interesting about it is the face is almost illuminated, which is kind of rare, because normally you just see the picture, you see the eyes, you don't see any part of the face. But if they wanted to project, I suppose, a different wavelength of the eyes glow to illuminate their face, I suppose they could. And because I have seen them when they stepped up, when I saw one in Iowa, it stepped up on a 2-track and its eyes just got huge. I mean, it just was surprised. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting picture. I included that. But that's some red eye glow.
The natives and their legends will tell you, you know, avoid the ones with the red eye glow. And in some cases, I think they're just saying that if you're encountering one that's really unhappy with you, the eyes tend to glow red. But in other cases, they're being specific, and they're saying, hey, there's 2 kinds in this area. There's the ones you don't have to worry about, and then there's that other kind that have the red eye glow. So since we don't know 100% the unequivocal answer on this one, if you see red eye glow, play it safe, get out of there if you can. That's always the best option.
Yeah, and I found that to be pretty true, really. I've had red eye glow around us, and generally that's not either. There's a feeling that comes with that that's not exactly welcoming. So
yeah, and you know, hopefully it's only a type 1 that's mad at you, and you're not like seeing a hungry type 4 or something. In which case, good luck.
Yeah. And then the last 3 pictures here, I just kind of included. The one is a picture from Iowa, from those Subterranean escarpments, and we were on an expedition with BFRO, and there was this actual Class A sighting. It was during this park had just opened up from winter, so it was just the first day of spring, and we had a cookout, and Barry and Elvie were with me, and they had done whoops and stuff, and people started seeing some like dark figures coming down into this ravine area, which was a kind of a large valley with a stream, clear trout stream, and about there was a Class A sighting. Somebody, one of the researchers, had seen one actually walk into the trail and leave, and he said he just saw it. He couldn't believe it. Well, not too far from there, Barry had seen something get into. It was about 100 to 75 yards from us. Something was moving around, and so he pointed it out to me. So I took about 30 pictures of it. None of them came in very good, but there is one picture, that this one I included, that you can see what I believe is a credible picture. And I sent this to M.K. Davis, and he looked it over, and he said it could be a Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, but the single pictures are it's obviously not a Patterson type picture, Patterson Gimlin type picture, but he definitely wasn't going to discount it, but he didn't say that it was a big. He said it certainly could be one, but because of the corroborating story that I had with it, the Class A sighting, and the fact that we had all seen activity in that area, I think this has some interesting dynamics to it. The picture itself in the center of it, and it's on my website. You can blow it up and look at it closer. The original picture, it looks much better. But in the center of it, there is a green leaf, and there's a triangle, and there's a face that you can see in that has some very dark eyes, and it's like it's almost got its head tilted back. And the reason I really like this picture, I sat on it for a year. I didn't. I believed it was just all pareidolia, which is very common. People see things in pictures of faces. Well, here I am on my high horse here saying this is not. But the reason I don't believe it's pareidolia is because there to the far right of it, you can see, if you blow this picture up, you can see its hand is wrapped around part of a sapling, and then its legs, it's almost like it's holding itself back, like it's really caught out in the open and trying to hide, which I think is telling itself that it does not want to be seen, and it's trying to break up its. And I took this picture through about 75 yards of brush and, timber. Yeah. So this isn't out in the open by any means. But it's got one leg kind of, the right leg is kind of curled under Indian style underneath, and it's outstretched. Left leg, its right leg is curled underneath there. It's got another, appears to be its hand is holding it around a branch, and it's literally kind of 3/4 of the way bent backwards, like it's trying to lay back almost, and just trying to break profile. So that's the reason why. I mean, if you look at the face on it, it looks pretty credible to me. I just put it out there for people to make their own opinion, and it isn't going to break any news. That this is the best Gimlin. But this was an area that this was a Karst system that had activity, a lot of, and they came real close. There was a Class A sighting right by there, so after sitting on it about a year, and I blew it up. I put it on my 4K TV. I bought one of them, which you can't get any 4K channels, but anyway, I put it on there, and when I saw it on that, I was like, oh wow, that's. I think I do have something here. So anyway, I encourage people to look at it. I included it just because it's in this Karst type system. It was taken on an expedition, and I have a story about it, and I think I posted it on your on the Montana Bigfoot Project too. So
well, people can make their own minds up, and that's what the show is about. We'll just present you guys with the evidence. You can take a look at it, listen to what we have to say, make up your own mind. Nothing's carved in stone. Nothing's 100%. Nothing's been resolved yet. Nobody's got one in their garage except for Wes, and he won't let me look at it, so that's not helping. And so until we actually have hands on, one of these things to take a close look at, this is about the best we can do for you. So, is there anything else?
That just shows how tough it is to get a picture of them. The
reality.
God, yeah. It's damn near impossible. They are so good at hiding. To get any glimpse of them like that is amazing. And then, of course, the last picture we had was the Patterson-Gimlin picture, and I thought, you just met Bob Gimlin, so maybe you wanted to mention that.
Yeah, that was such a hoot. I've been a fan of this guy since the film came out, and I had any awareness that there was such a thing. It was 5 years later that I actually saw one. And then after that, I became keenly interested in it. And since all that time, I've been thinking, it'd be fun to actually meet Bob Gimlin someday. But back in the old days, there weren't any conventions or anything, so there was no way to meet him. And just pretty much figured it would never happen. Well, now, recently, in the last decade or so, there's been a lot of conventions popping up, and Bob has been actually, popular and going to them, and God bless him and more power to him. That poor guy go through 30 years of hell after him and Roger got that film, and he never made a damn penny on it. All he did was just take a pile of crap for it. And so finally he's getting some nice approval, and people are saying some kind things to him and giving him some attention and some of the treatment basically deserved for being the guy that made this happen, because Roger didn't have the wherewithal to do it. If it hadn't been for Bob going along and supplying the horses, we never would have got that film. And then the hell they went through getting back out again. So after, decades of thinking about this, I had this image built up in my head that I would go to some conference sometime, and there'd be a long line there, and I would stand in that line and wait for an hour to get to the front and buy an autographed picture and say, thanks for getting the video, Patty, we all appreciate it, and you're my hero, and all that kind of good stuff. So here I am standing out in front of the conference with Mark Mersel having a cigarette with him, and across the parking lot comes walking two people. And the one of them I recognized first, Russell Acord from the International Bigfoot Conference, and the second one's a little bit shorter gentleman. When he gets closer, I can see it's Bob Gimlin. They're walking right toward us. Well, they recognized Mark, and I've got an IBF shirt on, so of course they're figuring, no, it's got to be somebody else who was just at the IBF. And Russell gets closer, he recognized me, of course, because we know each other. And he walks up and shakes hands with Mark first, and Bob's standing there not, knowing who to shake hands with, and there's only one option left, puts his hand out toward me and says, "Hey, buddy, how you doing?" and shakes my hand. And let me tell you, this was by far the least probable meeting of Bob Gimlin that I could have ever imagined, and I would have bet every penny I had against that ever happening. So, quite the spectacular moment for me. No, I didn't have to introduce myself to Bob Gimlin. He came walking up and shook my hand. And, of course, he has no idea who I am or that I do a show or anything like that. It wasn't that he recognized me or anything. He's just that kind of a kind, honest, good-hearted gentleman. And the way he's been portrayed on the shows and the way he comes across radio shows that you've heard him on and stuff, that's the real Bob Gimlin. He is a living legend, and rightfully so. The guy is amazing. He's a prime example of a really great human being, totally kind, outgoing, and wonderful person. And, that's about all I can say about it.
He's the best of what America should be proud of. A good cowboy who's a kind-hearted person. That is somebody that has stood the test of time and criticism all these years. Criticism he had taken. And he could still have a smile on his face to give a good handshake. That is a good man.
Yeah, he is. And a lot of people don't realize that this guy, he has not made much money on this. I mean, he is not well-to-do. He isn't sitting in some giant mansion or something. He's just, making it like the rest of us are. And at some point, he had one of these jerk TV producers come up and offer him $1 million to go on camera and say that footage was fake. For $1 million, he wouldn't do it. What does that tell you?
That's some integrity that you cannot imagine.
He ain't for sale. Bob Gimlin is not for sale.
That's right. That's awesome. Well, you have a great story. That was the first I heard it, so I thought I'd put the picture in to kind of spark something there for you. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it is the 50th anniversary, folks. It's like less than a month away from when they actually filmed it at this point. So, get ready for big hoopla in the Bigfoot world here surrounding the PG film for the next few weeks at least.
Yeah, and people get out there and look for yourself. We're giving you all the tools to go do this, and so if you're half interested in that, there's still an opportunity for the next great picture to come out. So
absolutely.
And
who got the last one? Was it research scientists? No, it was a couple of broken down cowboys with no money that just decided to go out and try and do it, and they did it.
Yep, that's right. Awesome.
Yeah, and I got to go back to what Bindernagel said. I was just watching a show he did last night where he was talking about citizen investigators and the lack of scientists actually doing the proper work in this field. And that, the citizen researchers or investigators don't always understand scientific method and don't always use the best approach to gathering their data and documenting it properly. But on the other hand, he went like 4 or 5 times and said, if it wasn't for those people, we wouldn't have any information on these things because they're the ones that are doing the whole job right now. Scientists, get off your lazy butts and start doing your job.
Exactly. And, and this is why we put this stuff out there. I'm not making any money off with the stuff I'm doing here. I freely give this information away. It's research that I've done that I spent my own dime on going on these expeditions, and I want other people to go and build on that. That's the joy of this whole thing for me. Is it's exciting. I enjoy the excitement of it, but the research end of it too is trying to put this puzzle together and just look at last 50 years between work that John Green has done from his books. We're able to now take a lot of this stuff, and even that picture you have posted for the show today, it was 100 years old. So we have just got to reach back and look at all of the historical references and tie it together with what we're doing today. It's an exciting time to be doing this.
Right on, it sure is, and it's fun. It's fun nowadays because there's people involved that we're actually starting to make forward progress on this whole question and can actually start, like you said, connecting the dots between some of these different issues and getting it sort of figured out. So, it's a really exciting time to be involved in it. There's more awareness of it than there ever has been. It's a lot easier to get the information. You've got the internet to help you with A lot of these researchers are actually publicly visible, so they talk to each other. You can get a hold of them and whatnot. So hopefully, if people will just quit fighting with each other and quitting being egomaniacs and actually start working together, and a few of them are, we're going to be able to get this going a whole lot faster. And at the point where we got enough information to get the scientists involved, it's really going to go fast because they've got the funding and everything to get out there and actually do a really good job with it. We just need to get them convinced that there's something there for them to go look at, and they'll take care of the rest of it. So that's where we're at with it right now. But thanks again for coming on the show, Rich. I always love having you on. We should have you on again at some time in the future here.
Duke, always a good time. I appreciate it. It's always a joy to talk to you, and looking forward to another time. I think we covered some great material today, so thanks again.
And like I always like to say at the end of every program, we have problems in our lives. We have things going on. Right now we got hurricanes and huge fires and stuff in the country. Do your part. Be part of the community. Be part of the society. Be part of the people of the United States. Reach out. Help everyone to the extent that you're capable of doing. And always try and be safe. Be kind to everyone else. And no matter what, God help you, do not hug the Wookiee. See you later.